Wichita teachers showing an overall positive view on the district, but many teachers are also concerned with the direction the district is heading. 12 News reporter Brock Wilson takes a look at those results.
I would probably attribute it to some of the budget cuts.
United Teachers of Wichita President Katie Warren says teachers are worried about changes.
And a lot of these changes have come about pretty quickly.
Evidenced by this trend, over 62% of teachers surveyed said they either disagree or strongly disagree with the statement Wichita Public Schools is headed in the right direction.
And I think that makes sense.
School Board President Stan Reeser says with all the changes happening in the district, he's not surprised teachers have concerns with budget cuts and the 5-year strategic plan.
What I read between the lines on that survey was that our teachers want to make sure that we understand how difficult their job is.
And his response?
Message received. So I'm hoping that within a year that plan will become extremely clear to everyone. And if not, we will go back to the drawing board.
There were some positive takeaways from the survey.
It asked overall, my building is a good place to work. And more than 4/5, 81.7% agreed or strongly agreed with that statement.
But teacher satisfaction still needs to be improved, and Warren says the district has to do a better job of communicating.
If you don't have the people that are doing the plans buy-in, that's concerning. So I think that it's going to be really important moving forward that the district does a job of clearly communicating their expectations and talking with their staff about the why behind it.
As Brock Wilson reporting, Warren says she's talked with the superintendent and they plan to meet soon to discuss the survey. If you'd like to read the full results, we do have them posted for you on the KWCH app.